All right, everybody, thanks for joining me again this week on ICU Doc Talk. Thanks for just listening to the things I have to say. I hope it's helpful. Again, I keep doing the promise that I want to have guests on my show and not just have an echo chamber of myself, but here we are again. It's just me. So there's not time. I'm trying. Anyway, I'm going to start out reading as an email I got from I get really great feedback and emails from people, so I really appreciate people emailing in and giving me your thoughts and stuff. I read all. I talked about it before. I can't address all the messages I get from TikTok or Instagram, but I do to my emails because it's more manageable, and it's usually people that clearly want to engage in more meaningful ways when you email me. So again, if you really want my attention, give me email me at icudrecmo@gmail.com. I think I've responded to every email sent to me. I think. Hope maybe there's one or two that I haven't got to yet. But anyway, so this is I want to read this because I kind of want to make it the topic for today. So this is from Jacob. I'll withhold his last name. He said it's okay if I share some portions from his email. He sent me a great email. So I'll just read some parts here and we'll go from there. He says, I really enjoyed learning about medicine and the human body, but one thing that has always held me back is A, the confidence that I am capable of learning this sort of material, and B, the confidence that I will be able to perform my responsibilities appropriately and effectively. For example, my body is not a huge fan of needles. I say that because I do not feel a fear of them like someone may fear the dark, but several times I have come close to a syncopal episode, that's fainting if you don't know, and have had one when getting blood work. I was wondering if you or someone you know may have had a similar experience and was able to use needles as a provider without trouble. My worry is that I want to advance in the medical field, but I cannot take someone's blood or give an injection. Thankfully, as an EMT, I won't be using needles. Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit about, I think this is a great topic today, backing up the confidence. So just to reiterate, things that have held this person back. The confidence that I am capable of learning this sort of material, and B, the confidence that I will be able to perform my responsibilities appropriately and effectively. That's what I want to really focus in on today. Being confidence, the confidence in yourself that you're capable, and the confidence that you'll perform. Let's get into that topic. All right, so first off, are people naturally more confident than other people? That's a big topic in and of itself that I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not a social scientist or anything, so I don't know if I can comment too much on that. But I do think so. I do think some people can be naturally more confident than others. Now, is that really confidence, or is it just like natural narcissism, or natural self-interest, or something like that? I don't know. But I do think there are personality types that are more confident than others. Now, does that mean someone can't be confident in their workplace because they're not naturally confident? Of course not. What really is confidence to begin with? So let me just kind of start with some stories. So when I was an undergraduate at university, I thought about going into medicine, and I thought maybe I would do chemistry or something like that because I was a chemistry major, which I loved chemistry, and I still miss and love chemistry a lot. But I was like, I guess I should try to go to med school because it seemed like a good idea. So part of going to med school is shadowing physicians, going to finding doctors and shadowing them. So I did that. I got in contact with a couple surgeons that I don't know how I got in contact with them, but I got their emails or something. And I I was like, hey, I'm someone, can I come and observe you? So I observed oh, this is good. These are two good stories. Okay, sorry. Let me back it up. So I observed a neurosurgeon and I observed a plastic surgeon. So in both of these, I went and saw brain surgery for the first time, and I had never. I didn't have a medical background. I had nobody in my life that was in medicine. My parents weren't physicians, and nobody in my family. So it was kind of a new world to me, right? So I went and saw this neurosurgery, and I didn't even really think about what it would be like being there, looking at someone's brain. But I'll never forget being scrubbed in, and the surgeon was like, "Yeah, check it out," and just flops back the scalp and drills into the skull and takes the skull off, and seeing a pulsating live brain for the first time, and that was like my first exposure to really to medicine, was like, whoa! I didn't faint, but I was like, whoa, I had to like look at the floor and kind of bend a little bit because I was very ill prepared for that experience of, actually seeing a human brain exposed like that. So that was a little overwhelming. Now I want you to compare and contrast that to today. So I do anesthetic for neurosurgery, and now looking at an open pulsating brain is very, very basic and boring to me. I'll only look in the surgical field at this point if I think something is going wrong with the patient. I want to know what's going on. Or I look in the surgical field to see where the surgeon's at. I mostly share the story just to illustrate how far, I've come from being that undergrad, almost fainting, looking at a open brain, to now I don't even blink at it. And the confidence that comes with that has to do with obviously experience and understanding what my role is, right? So, and then when back in that day, when I observed a plastic surgeon, he was doing if I think about back on it, he was doing a paniculectomy, which I didn't really know what that was at the time. But he was resecting a whole lot of fat tissue from someone who's obese, morbidly obese with a lot of fat tissue. It's just this hanging, it's called a pannus. It's the bottom of someone's stomach fat that hangs down very low, which obviously is a problem for getting around and skin infection, things like that. That surgeon, I don't remember the exact words that were said because it was a long time ago, but I remember the people in the room were making fun of the patient while the patient was asleep. I don't remember in what way, but I remember it bothered me. And now as a little undergraduate, I didn't say anything, which I should have. That's not an excuse. I should have said, hey, this isn't cool, making fun of an obese patient while they're under. Now, it is, I've seen it time and time again. People obese people patients being made fun of, or in certain ways at different times by staff. It still happens to this day. I see it all the time. People talking about the BMI, or people being like, oh, they have, I still hear it to this day, right? Now I remember I was in a medical school interview, and someone had me share that story. They had me share a story where I was morally challenged and during this med school interview, and they're like, well, why didn't you say anything? And I think I was like, well, I don't think it would have gone well. And that was the wrong thing to say, right? That was I should have said something. I didn't have the confidence. I think I was morally correct in that time, but I didn't have the confidence to do that. But now I do, and now I would. Now I say stuff back about that stuff, right? So confidence also is derived from the power that we wield. Unfortunately, I think the power that you wield correlates with your confidence. Now, what kind of power I'm talking about? Clinical power, expertise, power of your expertise, political power. There's many different types of power. I think maybe we'll delve into that a little bit more here. So there's clinical power, right? And that's the ability to be effective in a clinical setting and to know what you're doing. And that's based on experience. The more experience you have in medicine, the more clinical power you have to affect change in a clinical setting with a patient. That there is a certain amount of confidence and power that can only come from clinical experience. So that's why it is extremely important to listen to and to take mentors that are more, have more expertise than you in whatever your field is. Listen to them and try to understand how they operate, and try to develop your own style based on them. So clinical power and clinical confidence is a must to be an effective clinician, obviously. Anyway, but getting back a little bit to the original email by Jacob. So, he's worried about advancing in the medical field because he has this kind of visceral reaction to blood, which is common. This is a common thing. I think some people naturally have an aversion to like biological products like blood, and most people have aversions to snot and other bodily fluids that can happen. So when I just kind of going back, when I was an undergrad, I almost thought I was going to faint seeing a brain exposed for the first time. In fact, I had to look away, and I had to look in between my knees. I think I was probably close to fainting. It's because I had like zero exposure to these things, and I was way over my head. I had no idea what I was doing. Now let's go to it. Now let's contrast that to a story. So I had a patient that I was in a cardiac ICU. And the nurse practitioner that was called me. I was covering several patients in a couple different ICUs. And they called me and they said, you need to come to this bed right now. Now, when I get a call like that, I run to the patient's bed. I usually don't run because, well, for several reasons, I don't run. I think being, to get to a patient's bed, I think being out of breath and being all like driving your anxiety, I don't think it saves you a whole lot of time, and I think you're all discombobulated when you get there. However, when I get a call like that, when it's just come to this bed now, and it's like click, that's a very unique. It's like that's different than a code blue, like cardiac arrest, right? Cardiac arrest is like, oh, someone's in cardiac arrest. They probably already have chest compressions. The code is running. When it's come to this patient's bed now, there's imminent doom happening in that in that patient's room, and I could tell it in the person's tone. So I get to that patient's bed immediately, and they are doing chest compressions, and I can see this is a patient that had heart surgery, and just prior, like that day, and they had a bunch of blood that was coming out of their chest tubes, so we were worried that they were bleeding, that they're having post-operative bleeding of something around their heart. Something happened where the bleeding was not contained, and they were bleeding. So we're doing chest compressions and clearly not getting this patient back. We're trying to get blood products and things like that. This is not going well. I suspect at the time I thought the patient maybe had a pulmonary embolism, but which was the wrong thing to think. It was pretty. This patient was completely bleeding out, which was also on my kind of my differential. But at the time I was under the impression that maybe this patient had a PE, which in retrospect didn't make a lot of sense. The patient was on cardiopulmonary bypass. I don't even know if the patient had a history of PE and had already been heparinized and things like that. So it wasn't. Anyway, we did a sternotomy, opened up the patient's chest, and the surgical resident started doing cardiac massage. For those that don't know what that is, this is in an ICU bed. We got to reopen the patient's chest, cut the wires that were closed the sternum, and we're massaging the patient's heart to directly pump the blood from the patient's heart. That's cardiac massage. When you're cardiac massaging someone, this is like last, ditch efforts to save the patient's life. And when we open the patient's chest, the resident says, "There's no blood. There's no blood in here," which is like, in the patient's chest. And that was a very ominous sign because it was like this patient has exsanguinated, meaning they've lost their entire blood volume. They don't have any blood left in their body. It's all come out of the chest tubes. And he starts doing cardiac massage, and we get zero blood pressure, almost no blood pressure. So this patient has not we literally can't even physically pump the patient's heart. Literally manually with our hand on the patient's heart cannot pump blood through the patient's body because there's not enough blood. There's no blood in the body. The patient had bled out. Anyway, so we started the patient on ECMO. Long story short, all these efforts were futile, and the patient passed away. So I bring up this story because we're literally there with an open heart and, massaging a patient's heart. And I don't even think about it. So this is now, well into my career. You compare this to when I was an undergrad, right? Clearly I've come a long way in my visceral, that kind of revolting response to like patient's blood. My point is, with repeated exposure, I think, so I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. So I do think there's like legit phobias, and I don't know how exposure therapy works or cognitive behavioral therapy, how effective these things are with real phobias. But my point is, with repeated exposure and experience with it, experience is enormous, right? Experience is huge. Now, experience can get entrenched and can be wrong and can get blinders on because you think you have so much hubris, you have so much experience that you can be wrong all the time. If you're a medical student or a resident, you've observed it many, many, many times where you see your attending is absolutely wrong about something, despite your insistence, and they're like, "Oh no, it's probably not that," and you were right, right? So experience is not like everything. Well, I'll rephrase that. Experience doesn't mean you're 100% right about everything all the time. Obviously not. That's why the more experience you get, the more you should be open to all opinions. Anybody of any experience who has something to tell you, you should listen to them. Anyway, my point is, if you're one of these people that a drop of blood makes you, I don't know if that's something that's going to be a permanent thing for you. Maybe it is, but I would say repeated exposure and breathing exercises while it's happening, and exposure again and again and again will probably desensitize you to that, where you can then think critically and get out of that phase, right? I see open hearts and open lungs and open bellies every day of my life, open brain. I don't even think about it, right? It's second nature. It's not something I think about anymore. All right, now let's touch on this fear that Jacob talked about, of that you don't think you'll ever be able to get to there, right? I know that fear very, very well. And I think everybody does when you're starting out, when you're either a novice or you're starting out beginning of something, and you are around someone that's very experienced and knows a lot. You cannot possibly imagine that you'll have the confidence and the critical thinking and the capacity to be that person. We all, every single one of us knows that fear, that you will never be good enough to be where that person is. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what an idiot I felt like as a medical student. So I don't think I was a particularly good medical student. I think I was very average, pretty mediocre, which is fine. I didn't. It's not like I was like, oh, I got to be the best. I constantly felt like I didn't really know what's going on. And here's the thing. I didn't even know the depth of my misunderstanding as a medical student. As a medical student, you're going from one rotation to the next and widely different medical fields. And you barely, you read up a little bit and you barely start to understand the field at all. And then you go jump into, a different rotation. So it's this constant back and forth, on and on and on. And you never really get good at anything. That's just, it's all about exposure. That's like most of what medical school is, your clinical rotations. So when I was a medical student, I remember just being like, how could I possibly, have the level of clinical expertise of like these attending physicians that I'm seeing. And the same thing with when I was an intern. I remember, this is so funny, when I was an intern in the ICU, which I was very overwhelmed and had no idea what I was doing in a surgical intensive care unit. And I remember there was a fourth year anesthesia resident that was on the service as well. And there was a patient that came up from the operating room, and as soon as they hit the ICU, their blood pressure was starting to go down. Like it was going down a little bit. It was probably significantly. It was probably like 50 over 30 or something. And the nurse comes in to the workroom and she's like, to me, she's like, you got to come in. The patient's blood pressure's dropping. And I was like, what do I do? And I went in there and I was like, I like kind of had that like panic brain. And the fourth year anesthesia resident came in and just turned off the propofol infusion. And that helped the blood pressure. Propofol drops your blood pressure significantly. And that helped the blood. And he was like, I get some fluid. And he walked out. And I remember I was like, wow, he was so confident. Whoa. And this was early in my intern year. That was nothing. Like what that guy did was literally, it was like the bare, it was like took no, now in retrospect, he did the right thing. I'm not saying that he did the wrong thing, but in retrospect, what that guy did, the confidence that he had, I admire that so much. And now when I think about it, like that was so nothing. Like I just thought that was such an incredible move that he did. And I just look at how far I've come, being an intern and thinking, oh, turning out the propofol was this brilliant gambit, this brilliant clinical gambit. And now, the depth and breadth of the complexity that I deal with every single day in the ICU is infinitely beyond that. I put people on ECMO. So I don't know. I'm sharing this stuff to be like, I was once, I was that med student or that undergrad student who had no idea what they're doing and was just trying to like, make it. And now I have a lot of clinical experience and expertise, and I feel very, very confident at work. And with my team, not just alone, but to do those things. So I've come that way, just like everybody else has. Anybody that you see that you perceive as being confident, and you want to emulate them, and you want to be like them, they took the same journey that you're trying to take right now. It's not like you're just born confident and capable. Which is another thing. There's being confident and there's being capable. These are two different things. Hopefully they should coincide. Now, confidence is not arrogance, right? These are different things. You can be confident and not be arrogant. You can be arrogant and confident as well. I think the main difference between arrogance and confidence is arrogance suggests superiority, right? When someone's arrogant, there's this baseline, like they probably believe they're superior to those that they're around. That's what arrogance is. And as I said, someone can be arrogant and unconfident, but someone can be, meek and humble and confident as well. Confident does not require you to be arrogant or conceited. Confident is just being able to act with power and expertise. I want to talk about an attribute of someone that is confident, a confident person, an attribute, and it's kind of paradoxical. And on top of that, not only do I know this person's confident, but I know they're competent, and I would trust this person more. And it's a person who asks a question when they don't understand something. Do that. seriously, if you're listening, I cannot believe how much it happens in medicine where people just nod along, and they have no idea what is being talked about, and they just assume the next person does, and they don't want to look dumb. Looking dumb in front of people is not a sign that you're not confident. I all the time on ICU rounds, I'll say dumb things, right? And I'm the attending. I don't understand the context or something, and I'm like, and I say something, and I see everyone just kind of quiet. I'm like, oh wait, I just said something dumb. There's something I'm not understanding. I do it all the time. Like, I remember, I forgot what it was. Man, it was such a dumb thing. It was something about a patient with severe liver disease who's coagulopathic, and I think I mentioned putting in an ICP monitor in their head, and it's like, well, they can't have that because they would bleed, and they had metastatic cancer. Anyway, it was like the dumbest suggestion in the world, and I was like, oh wait, never mind, that was dumb. What I'm saying is, ask questions and bring up things that you think might be a good idea, or I guess I should rephrase that. Don't be afraid to bring up your ideas by fear of looking dumb. Everybody looks dumb all the time. Like, we do it all the time. We'll say things in the wrong context or the wrong thing, or we legitimately say a dumb thing. Like in that example I just said, like I'll say stupid and dumb things all the time. But you shouldn't be afraid to do that. In fact, that is a sign of confidence. If you're willing to speak up and offer something, it doesn't matter if the idea doesn't get used, or if it turns out to be like, maybe that wasn't the best idea. That's fine. And then asking, if someone's like, okay, we're going to do this thing, blah, 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 like pausing the conversation, be like, what is that? Explain it to me. I don't know what that is. And I find it easier to do that. Like, it's easier for me to say that, right? Because I'm in a leadership role. And so I have that, air of confidence already in being in a leadership role. So it's easier. I feel like it's easier for me to get away with being, I guess you should say, like, a physician attending has more political and social capital within their institution, so they can feel probably a little more comfortable acting dumb and asking questions. But this is a harder thing if you're like a medical student or a resident. You don't want to look dumb in front of your peers or in front of your attending or something like that, or the nurses or something like that. But I guess sorry, I'm just applying this to med students. I should apply it to EMS students and nursing students and pharmacy students. It's kind of an umbrella of all medical staff and outside medicine as well. Anyway, I just don't want this to be limited just to my life experience, which I often do sometimes, but that's just kind of how it is. But just be like, what is that? Now, you don't want to be too over the top and asking questions constantly in a setting like that, because then you're just going to start being annoying and being a deterrent to, your team. But, appropriately asking questions, what is this? And bringing up your ideas, that's a really good leadership sign and a sign of confidence, and building your confidence, building your expertise, and building your confidence to talk in front of in front of people. That's another thing to talk about. Confidence to speak in front of other people. Oh, that is a hard thing for people, right? That is a very difficult thing. I think the best piece of advice I could give about speaking in front of other people, speaking in front of a large group, is that people don't care as much as you think they do. Like, I think we all exaggerate what our perception is that other people have of us. I think we put more weight in our minds of what people think of us than they actually do. Meaning, if you flub a word or if you say something stupid, you think sometimes we assume that we're going to be branded that way in people's minds. And maybe I'm a little like naive, idealistic, but I don't think people are as cynical as that. I don't think people write you off immediately. Maybe some people do. But I guess people don't care as much as you think they do about how you speak or the language that you use, as long as it's respectful and stuff, obviously. I think my point is, with all of this, that you put yourself out there, and you have to just not care a little bit what people think of you, and be okay with the uncertainty that okay, maybe you may have come off dumb in this circumstance, but you probably didn't to everybody. And if you did it one person, then that's their problem. That's not your problem. I do think there's something to say about, it's not being callous, but it's just being okay with the uncertainty of not knowing how people perceive, how you are, I don't know, carrying yourself in public or something like that. Just having a certain aloofness. Now, not arrogance, right? But being a little bit of aloof to what you may think other people are thinking about you, if I'm making any sense at all. But I think that's a big key to like public speaking and being confident in front of other people. The next just kind of component of this that I wanted to talk about is that sometimes the uncertainty that we have about ourselves and our ability to perform is that we believe in medicine, and not only in medicine but in other fields, that we believe everything is on us to, our performance is, the result is 100% based on our performance alone. And that, particularly in medicine, that is not true, because medicine is so complex and it's such a collaborative system that you work in, that, whether you're a ICU nurse or a nurse anesthetist or you're ICU physician, whatever it is, the weight of that patient's, of a single patient's care and throughout the entire hospital is not just solely on your shoulders. You're part of a collaborative, care team network. And I think when you know that, I think the pressure is off of you a little bit. And that can, help mitigate anxiety that you may have, in the workplace, that you should put your trust in others. You should ask questions. You should recognize that you are a part of a team, and you should be afraid to speak out and to ask questions. It's so important. It's so extremely important. Okay, and then another thing that just can absolutely destroy your confidence is making mistakes, right? So anything that relies on human beings to function is flawed, because human beings are flawed. Every single one of it does not matter how smart you are. Every single one of us makes cognitive errors, and there's many sources for our cognitive errors, right? We have different biases. We make decisions based on limited information. We guess about things. We can get anchoring bias. We think we're right about something. We get tunnel vision. There's many reasons that we make cognitive errors, and in medicine we make cognitive errors all the time. I have made many, many, many cognitive errors. And when you make a mistake, that can be a huge blow to your confidence, right, and your ability to perform. It can set you back significantly, making a mistake, particularly when you're early in your training and you make a mistake. You could think that's like the final blow, like, oh, I'm not cut out for this because I made the mistake. Now, that it's not true at all. Every single person makes mistakes. You can make mistakes any time in your career. So what do you do with that? When you've made a mistake and you've made a mistake, and maybe it's even resulted in patient harm. Again, I'm just talking about healthcare here. What do you do with that? What do you do? Well, doing a little mental analysis yourself of the events and what occurred. How much was it really a mistake that you made, or how much was it a systems error, like something that can be attributed to the system itself, where you can identify, like, hey, this is a problem in how we do things, like within protocols or a system. And then how much was it really a mistake that you made? Where was the weakness? Think about it yourself. Talk with people. You need to what's the word? Not decompress, but debrief with everybody involved. And then when I make a mistake, rather than ruminating about it alone, you should recognize it immediately, and you should, and this is my opinion, you should announce, culpability. Like, when I make a mistake, I do not put blame. You do not try to shift blame on anybody else, because people know when you're BSing. People know when you're trying to shift blame, right? Human beings are extremely good at that, when knowing if someone is trying to shift blame. Just your tone, your language, people know that. You know what I'm talking about. You can recognize it immediately when there's a situation that has occurred, and when someone is trying to shift blame. Even when you think you're being clever about it, you're not. People know what you're doing when you're trying to shift blame to something else, or just kind of obfuscate and just be like, oh, who knows, I recognize it and be like, that was me. When I make a mistake, I made a mistake yesterday in the operating room, which was fine, didn't result in any patient harm, but I think I made kind of a bad call. This was just yesterday, with the surgeon, and I'll just share. The mistake was, I think the patient should have had an arterial line, and me and the nurse anesthetist, we did not put one in. We didn't think it was needed. And the surgeon was kind of upset during the operation, being like, hey, the patient probably should have had a arterial line. And after talking with him and kind of thinking about it more, I'm like, he was absolutely right. It should. And so while the surgeon was operating, I was like, hey, I apologize. That was my fault. That was my call to not put an arterial line. I was like, we can put one in right now if you'd like. He was like, no, my point is, I was like, oh, I messed up here. I'm going to go fix this immediately. I didn't go off and ruminate. I talked about it immediately, and recognize it, like, and being the attending anesthesiologist, it's, I'm like, okay, this is obviously ultimately comes down to my decision. So I took responsibility for that and then tried to rectify it immediately and talked about it in person, face to face, right? Take care of it, talk about it, and then it's over. It's done. Obviously, the patient was fine. It's not a big deal. But get it done with. Don't go home and ruminate and then apologize later in some email. or the worst is don't recognize the mistake that you didn't make. Just ignore it and then get an email the next day from your leadership being like, hey, this is kind of a problem that this happened, right? Don't prevent that email from happening to yourself. Take care of it right away, because we all make mistakes. And I have huge respect for people that recognize mistakes they've made and try to rectify it in the moment. Now, it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do. But it is the right thing to do. And you should always do the right thing at any time. Anyway, this has been quite a rambling. I don't even know what I've been talking about here. I don't know if any of this has been useful. Thanks for that email that was sent in. But let's move on to a book now. All right, the book for this week is going to be, it's called This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, The Cyber Weapons Arms Race by Nicole Perlroth. This book is about 500 pages. It was released in February 2021. So this book is about cyber warfare, which is not something that I am knowledgeable about. Having, being someone of a medical history background, I don't, I'm not a tech person. I don't understand technology very well, and I certainly don't understand cyber warfare. So that's why I read this book. Basically, according to this book, we are on the precipice of a cyber warfare catastrophe. This book is really disturbing to read. So, as I said, I really don't, I'm pretty dumb when it comes to computers and hacking and cybercrime and anything along those lines. And like many Americans, I've gotten alert fatigue from daily news reports of like foreign hacking in American business and government agencies. So I was the exact person who should read this book. Perlroth really does a masterful job explaining to the layman the complete and utter disaster that ensnares the current geopolitical landscape and the certain doom that lies in wait for everybody. Make no mistake, after reading this book, we are living in a very precarious time. We all know that, but if you don't know, also with cyber warfare, it's extremely precarious. So let me just back it up. So what is a zero-day exploit? So that's a vulnerability unwittingly written into software code that a hacker can discover to gain entry and manipulate anything which that software controls. That's the basis of this book. 0 days are terrifying because the designer, by definition, doesn't know the vulnerabilities even exist until it's discovered. And when the company does find out that there is it's called day zero. It's day zero when they discover it, and so they try to fix it so someone doesn't exploit the patch. That's why it's called 0 day exploits. Back in the early 2000s, 0 day exploits were rarely spoken of openly. Some companies started creating a market wherein they paid hackers for 0 days as a bounty and then would sell the 0 day information back to the company so that they could patch the vulnerability. What was at first viewed as like a vile, illegal practice suddenly became more acceptable, especially once the U.S. government started buying 0 day exploits. The U.S. government started a 0 day market, stockpiling massive amounts of coding vulnerabilities about U.S. companies with the excuse that it would aid in terrorist surveillance. This spurred the market into a frenzy where companies and foreign governments and private buyers started shelling out big bucks for 0 day exploits, especially if they could hack into big tech companies like Google and Microsoft and Apple. With the right 0 day, anyone could enter someone else's code unaware and even surveil the comings and goings for months to years before being discovered. Under the reckless direction of Barack Obama and Israel, an incredibly sophisticated 0 day called Stuxnet was used to sabotage machinery in an Iranian nuclear enrichment facility. Stuxnet was a little too much of a success, meaning not only did it set back the Iranians back a decade, but that 0 day proliferated around the world like a virus and even came back to infect U.S. computers. A 0 day arms race ensued after that, involving not only Iran, but Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, North Korea, and pretty much any country that wanted to defend itself or provoke havoc on a global enemy. In 2014, Russia attacked Ukraine with a cyber weapon that knocked out power, public transportation, and supply chains. Why would they do this? It was a testing ground and an open shot to the U.S. and to Ukraine, obviously, in retrospect. Only a few years later, Russians were hacking their way through the U.S. 2016 election, public voting registries, the DNC, and much more. Russian trolls reached 126 million voters with 288 million Twitter impressions. Russians breach voter registration data. And I'm not even mentioning the successful hacking of Google by China and other cyber attacks on U.S. companies by Iran and North Korea. Stealing intellectual property is like a mainstay of China foreign policy. That's where they get a lot of their technology, is by stealing it. So I would be, talking about this all day if I were to mention all of the significant cyber attacks that have happened in just the last 10 years. Think about every little bit of hardware and software that controls not only private citizens' lives, but public facilities, power plants, railways, and computer systems. Right at this moment, they're all vulnerable. Right now. Russia is deeply integrated into the American online ecosystem. By reneging on the Iranian nuclear deal and provoking a trade war with China, Donald Trump did the U.S. no favors in stopping what was likely a cyber war ceasefire with those countries. Trump literally got rid of a national cybersecurity leader and insisted that Russia played no part in the hacking of the 2016 election, despite literally every American agency offering proof to the contrary. So this book was absolutely terrifying. After reading, I believe that major fallout from a cyber attack is probably inevitable. Diplomacy across countries is as important as ever. Why? Because the internet has no borders. Leaders of other countries have no scruples, including the United States government, and there are shadow brokers out there right now selling vulnerabilities to the highest bidder. Make no doubt about it, cyber warfare is an existential threat to human beings, up there with nuclear warfare and climate change. I highly, highly recommend this book, which I really haven't done any justice at all. It's extremely important to read. And also, just a reminder, update the most recent patch on your phone and any software that you use, because that's how they get rid of zero-day vulnerabilities. Every patch, every update is doing that. So again, this book was called This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, The Cyber Weapons Arms Race by Nicole Perlroth. She's a New York Times cybersecurity reporter. Excellent, vital book to read. All right, let's finish off this episode with a question from TikTok. This is a question from Dare Shields, D-A-E-R Shields, saying, "You're quite the reader. I always appreciate your thoughtfulness on big issues. If you were to write your own nonfiction book, what would it be about?" So I definitely thought about writing my own nonfiction book. And I've thought of different things. I've considered doing a memoir on just experience in medical field and healthcare, which would be pretty easy to write. I could just sit down and just kind of write things off the top of my head. Honestly, what I would really like to write about is like political and social stuff and economic stuff, but I don't really have the credentials to do it, and I don't think I have the expertise to do that. But solutions about society's problems, I'd love to write stuff about that. My social thoughts about things that are wrong in our culture, and I think solutions for them. But again, I don't think I really have the credential clout to kind of ethically write a book about that. It would just kind of be my random thoughts off random books that I've read and thoughts like that. But yeah, and then healthcare. The healthcare system and the problems with healthcare is probably the nonfiction book that I should be writing. And I probably will eventually write a book like that, but I kind of want a little more experience under my belt in healthcare system, American healthcare system, and talking about universal healthcare and the approaches to it and how to achieve it, which I 100% believe universal healthcare is achievable in the United States, and it could take many different forms, whether that's expanding Medicare or expanding more of the public market. There's so many approaches to do this. Anyway, that's probably what I should be writing a book about. But in the meantime, I'll be writing fiction and sci-fi because I enjoy it more than I get enough of this real stuff in my daily life. Anyway, I'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for listening. My TikTok handle is ICU Doctor. I'm on Instagram, ICU Doctor TikTok, and then you can email me ICUDrECMO, ECMO @gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Email me anytime if you have any thoughts or ideas. And that's it. Thank you.